In the studio now, Lester Munson. He is a principal at BGR Group, a leading government relations firm based here in Washington, D.C. For me, the highlight of the week was the appearance of the former U.S. ambassador to the Ukraine, Ambassador Yovanovitch. A lot of media attention was paid to her. What did you think of her testimony?
Well, she spoke at some length. Her testimony lasted for several hours. It was quite compelling. And I think for those of us who follow U.S. diplomacy very closely or understand the inner workings of Washington, it was riveting testimony. She talked about what was going on with her professional life while this other policy that the president was pursuing with Ukraine was going on, and how she found out about it and how it eventually led to her being dismissed from her job.
So what you're saying is, if you are a policy wonk, as we say here in Washington, which means that you follow these things very, very closely, then it was very interesting. But what about for ordinary Americans? Did it move the needle at all?
Well, I don't think it did. Americans are pretty well divided on whether they support or oppose President Trump. This doesn't seem to have affected those numbers at all. There's a very small number of people in the middle, I suppose, who could be persuaded one way or the other. Right. But we're only at the very beginnings of an impeachment process, so it doesn't surprise me too much that those numbers haven't moved. But it's clear that the Democrats, if they want to be successful, have a lot of work to do.
Well, let me raise an issue which certainly surprised me, and that was in the middle of Ambassador Yovanovitch's testimony, towards the beginning, actually. President Trump live tweeted what amounted to really a Twitter attack on her character and her professionalism. Now, what do you make of well, I suppose it speaks to our times, doesn't it, that that can be done. But what do you make of the fact that he did it?
Well, evidently he was watching, so we know that. It was criticized by both Democrats and Republicans, and I think appropriately so. It seemed very mean-spirited commentary on a woman who, frankly, had spent 33 years of her life serving her country and serving in a very able way and in some very tough circumstances. I really don't think it's fair to be attacking her in public, no matter who you are.
Now, what about the rest of the world? How do you sense this is playing out among people who are not in America, but who get glimpses of this on the news?
Well, my guess is they see this as a continuation of the kind of crazy events that have happened in Washington since President Trump got elected. We've had one soap opera after another. We had a 2-year-long investigation into these allegations that Russia was involved in the election and that he may have sought that out. Those eventually came to naught. This seems to be the new, kind of chapter 2 in that story. So I suspect that this is seen as business as usual, at least as it's currently described in Washington.
I do think to our viewers around the world that this is just a process, isn't it? It looks, see, impeachment is a very ugly word. It really is just a charge.
That's right.
So the president is being charged, or may be charged, but this is just a process. It doesn't necessarily mean that he'll end up being removed from office, right?
In fact, right now, it looks like it's very unlikely he will be removed. We are still in the House part of the process, and this is just the investigation. Some of it's in public. That's what Ambassador Yovanovitch was involved in the other day. There are other depositions being taken in private. Some were released this weekend. There's a little bit of new news every time those transcripts are released. We're going to see more hearings next week. But that's just the beginning. At a certain point, this issue will have to be handed off to the House Judiciary Committee, where they will presumably consider articles of impeachment against the president.
And as you say, more hearings next week. 3 big witnesses, at least, including the former European ambassador, Sondland.
That's right.
Will it wrap up then?
Well, we think so, but just a few hours ago, Speaker Pelosi said she doesn't know when this is going to end, kind of opening the door to a longer public hearing process. So it's really anyone's guess at this point.
Okay, Lester Munson, as always, thank you very much.
Thanks for having me.
Thank you, sir.